Hannah Mercer stood beside the crib long after the apartment had gone quiet. Her daughter was asleep, one tiny hand curled against the blanket, breathing slow and even. 1 year old. So small. Hannah watched the rise and fall of that little chest and felt the familiar weight settle in her own. Motherhood was not just love. It was vigilance. It was knowing that every choice now echoed beyond herself. She adjusted the blanket once more, careful not to wake her, and only then allowed herself to sit. In moments like this, her thoughts always drifted backward. Hannah had entered the world alone. Her biological mother died during childbirth, a fact that was always stated plainly without emotion, as if grief could be filed away with paperwork. There were no stories of lullabies or first smiles, no warm memories passed down to her. Her mother existed only in a photograph and in the quiet spaces where something should have been. For the first years of her life, Hannah was raised by her father and her grandmother. It was her grandmother who filled the house with routine and reassurance, who tied her shoes and held her when nightmares came. Those years were not joyful, exactly, but they were steady. Hannah felt seen. Then her grandmother died. The house changed after that. The silence became heavier, less forgiving. Her father, suddenly alone with a young child and a full-time job, seemed lost in ways Hannah did not yet understand. When Diane entered their lives, Hannah was old enough to notice the shift, but young enough to believe it might be good. Diane was warm at first. She brushed Hannah's hair, bought her dresses, took her on walks. Hannah wanted desperately to belong to this new shape of family, to believe that something whole was forming around her. For a while, it almost felt that way. Then Diane had her own children. The change was subtle at first, almost polite. Hannah was asked to wait more often, to be quiet more frequently, to understand more than a child should have to. The attention that once flickered in her direction settled firmly on the new babies. Diane's world narrowed to feedings and schedules and exhaustion, and Hannah learned quickly where she fit within it. She became the helper, the older one, the one who should know better. Her father followed Diane's lead without question. He came home from work tired and went straight to the nursery, his voice softened there, his face lighting up in ways Hannah rarely saw anymore. When he spoke to Hannah, it was brief and practical. Did you do your homework? Watch your sister. Keep an eye on your brother. There was no cruelty in it, just absence. And absence, Hannah learned, could hurt just as much. As the years passed, Hannah faded into the background of her own home. Meals were eaten around her. Conversations continued as if she were not there. Praise was reserved for the younger children. Mistakes, however small, were noticed immediately when they came from her. Love became something earned through usefulness, not something freely given. By the time Hannah understood what was happening, it already felt normal. She did not protest. She adapted. She learned to be quiet, to be helpful, to expect little. Somewhere along the way, she absorbed the lesson that would shape her life more than any other. In this family, love was conditional, and she was not the condition being met. As Diane gave birth to Kayla, and then a few years later to Evan, Hannah's place in the household became fixed, as if an invisible label had been quietly attached to her. She was no longer simply the older child. She was the helper, the extra set of hands, the one who was supposed to manage without asking. Her father's attention shifted completely. Whatever space Hannah had once occupied in his world disappeared beneath diapers, bottles, pediatric appointments, and the constant hum of concern for the younger children. He spoke of Kayla and Evan with pride, with excitement, with the soft affection Hannah rarely heard directed toward her. When he looked at them, his face brightened. When he looked at Hannah, his expression stayed neutral, practical, already moving on to the next task. Diane, consumed by her long-awaited experience of motherhood, had little patience left for her stepdaughter. Instructions replaced conversations. Orders replaced warmth. Hannah was expected to understand, to adapt, to be grateful she was old enough not to need so much. If Diane needed time alone, Kayla was handed to Hannah without discussion. Later, Evan followed. Hannah learned to soothe crying babies before she had learned how to ask for comfort herself. There was no praise for this, no acknowledgement that it was difficult. Caring for 2 active children required constant attention, but Hannah's effort was treated as obligation, not contribution. If the house was quiet, it was expected. If something went wrong, Hannah was blamed. "You're older, you should know better." That phrase became a refrain, used to dismiss her fatigue, her frustration, her childhood. Her father did not intervene. He assumed, perhaps unconsciously, that Hannah was capable of more simply because she was not small anymore. He trusted her to manage, to assist, to step aside, and Hannah, desperate for approval, did exactly that. She worked harder, listened more closely, tried to anticipate what was needed before being asked. She hoped that if she became indispensable, she might also become valued. That hope went unanswered. As Kayla and Evan grew, they absorbed the family's unspoken hierarchy. They learned that Hannah was not an authority, not someone whose feelings mattered. They spoke to her the way they heard adults speak to her, impatiently, dismissively. They expected her help without gratitude. When Hannah objected or showed irritation, she was scolded for being selfish. "Don't you see how tired your mother is? Why can't you just help without complaining?" By the time Hannah reached her teenage years, the pattern was complete. Her dreams were never discussed. Her struggles were not noticed. School performances, personal interests, moments that might have defined her identity, passed quietly, without witnesses. The family celebrated milestones for Kayla and Evan with enthusiasm, while Hannah's achievements were met with silence or distracted nods. She stopped sharing things altogether. At home, Hannah learned to make herself smaller. She moved through rooms carefully, conscious of being in the way. She measured her words, aware that speaking too much invited criticism. When she was upset, she swallowed it. When she was hurt, she endured it. The message was consistent and unmistakable. She was allowed to exist here, but not to take up space. Eventually, Hannah understood the truth she had been circling for years. She was not loved in the way children should be loved. She was tolerated, useful when needed, invisible when not. And with that realization came something else, quiet but powerful. A hunger, a longing to be somewhere, anywhere where her presence would be wanted, where her care would not be taken for granted, where love would not depend on how much she gave. She did not yet know where that place was, but she knew with growing certainty that it was not here. By the time Hannah understood that nothing would change at home, she had already begun planning her escape. It was not dramatic. There were no arguments, no declarations. It was a quiet decision made late at night while folding laundry or rocking one of the children to sleep. She would leave, and the only way out she could see was education. School became the one thing she could control. It was not easy. Hannah was exhausted most days, pulled in too many directions at once. Mornings began early, helping Diane get the younger children ready, cleaning up before classes. Afternoons were filled with errands, babysitting, cooking. By evening, when other students were relaxing or meeting friends, Hannah was already tired. Still, she opened her books. Still, she studied. She chose a practical path, teacher training. It was not a dream born of ambition or prestige. It was a calculation. Teaching was a profession she could enter relatively quickly, one that promised stability without requiring years of unpaid study her family would never support. She knew better than to expect help. College tuition, living expenses, time to find herself. Those were privileges reserved for someone else's children. At home, there was no space to concentrate. Noise filled every room. Requests never stopped. If Hannah tried to sit with a textbook, someone needed her. Slowly, she learned to disappear elsewhere. The public library became her refuge. It was quiet there, predictable. No one demanded anything of her. Between shelves and wooden tables, Hannah rebuilt what years of neglect had eroded. Her grades improved. Concepts that once felt distant began to make sense. Teaching practice changed something deeper. In classrooms, Hannah felt unexpectedly steady. Children listened to her. They trusted her. She knew how to explain things patiently, how to notice when someone was struggling without making them feel small. Teachers supervising her practice praised her instincts, her calm presence, her ability to connect. For the first time, Hannah felt competent in a way that did not depend on usefulness alone. She was good at this, naturally good. Those comments never made it home. At dinner, if she mentioned a successful lesson or kind words from a mentor, the response was distracted. Diane was tired. The younger children needed help. Her father nodded absently, already thinking about something else. Hannah learned to keep these moments to herself. They felt safer that way, unexposed to indifference. As graduation approached, Hannah spent less time at home whenever she could. She stayed late at the library, studied at classmates' apartments, lingered after practice sessions. It was not rebellion. It was survival. Every hour away made her goal feel more real. The day she received her diploma passed almost unnoticed in the Mercer household. There was no celebration, no pride, no sense that something important had happened. Diane commented vaguely that it was good Hannah had finished. Her father reminded her she was an adult now and should start thinking about supporting herself. Hannah listened quietly. Packing her belongings took less time than she expected. There was not much to take. A few clothes, books, papers she had worked hard for. When she zipped her bag closed, she did not feel sad. She felt focused. Graduation was not the end of her struggle. She knew that, but it was the first clear line she had drawn for herself. A silent promise that she would not stay invisible forever. Hannah left the house early in the morning, carrying everything she owned in one worn suitcase and a backpack. There were no tearful goodbyes. Her father reminded her, calmly and without hesitation, that she was an adult now and should not expect financial help. Diane added that the household budget was already stretched thin with 2 younger children. Hannah nodded. She had not expected anything else. She stepped outside with little money and no safety net, but with a strange sense of relief settling in her chest. The room she managed to rent was in a decaying building on the edge of the city. The walls were thin, the floors creaked loudly, and the shared kitchen and bathroom were used by people Hannah did not trust. Some nights were filled with shouting, other nights with heavy footsteps pacing the hallway. It was not safe, not comfortable, and certainly not dignified, but it was hers. No one ordered her around. No one blamed her for existing. For the first time, Hannah felt free. That freedom, however, came at a cost. Hannah immediately began searching for work and education. She sent applications to public schools, charter schools, and private programs. The responses were polite but discouraging. Schools with decent salaries required classroom experience she did not yet have. Others were willing to hire her, but offered wages that barely covered rent, let alone food, transportation, or health care. Administrators spoke kindly about starting somewhere and building experience, unaware that Hannah did not have the luxury of waiting. Every rejection tightened the knot in her stomach. Days turned into weeks. The small savings she had scraped together during school dwindled rapidly. She skipped meals, stretched groceries, walked instead of taking public transit whenever possible. The anxiety of not knowing how she would pay next month's rent pressed down on her constantly. Hannah had imagined that once she left home, things would improve quickly. Instead, reality met her with indifference. Eventually, desperation overpowered pride. Through a contact she barely knew, Hannah found work selling clothing at a local market. The job was nothing like what she had trained for. She spent long hours standing outside in all kinds of weather, calling out to passers-by, lifting heavy boxes, unpacking and repacking merchandise. Her hands ached. Her back burned by the end of each day. The pay was better than anything the schools had offered, especially with commission, but the work drained her physically and emotionally. At first, Hannah felt ashamed. She had studied for years. She had dreamed of classrooms and lesson plans, not shouting prices over market noise. Each morning, as she pulled on worn gloves and arranged clothes on hangers, she reminded herself that this was not who she was. It was just what she had to do. Survival came first. Despite the exhaustion, the job kept her afloat. She could pay rent. She could eat. She could breathe again, even if only slightly. Hannah told herself it was temporary, just until she saved enough to rent a safer place, just until she could afford to take a lower-paying teaching job, just until things stabilized. At night, she lay on her narrow bed listening to unfamiliar voices through the walls, replaying her days in her head. She was tired, sore, and uncertain, but she was moving forward on her own terms. For the first time in her life, the hardship belonged to her alone, and that made all the difference. One evening, after the market had begun to empty and the noise of the day faded into scattered echoes, Hannah found herself alone with the heaviest part of the work still ahead of her. The shared carts were gone, already taken by other vendors, and what remained was a massive fabric bag stuffed with unsold clothing. She stared at it, knowing she did not have the strength to lift it. There was no choice. Hannah pulled on her gloves and began dragging the bag across the pavement toward the storage area. At first, she managed. Then the strain caught up with her. Her shoulders burned, her lower back screamed, and dark spots flickered at the edges of her vision. The market, once crowded, now felt eerily deserted. No one noticed her struggling. That was when a voice broke through the silence. "Hey, you shouldn't be doing that by yourself." Hannah turned and saw a man walking toward her. He was tall, with an easy confidence in the way he moved. Dark hair, slightly tousled as if he never bothered to tame it. He smiled as he approached, not in a way that felt intrusive, but familiar, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. Before she could object, he lifted the bag effortlessly, as though it weighed nothing at all. "I'm Logan," he said casually, adjusting his grip. "And this looks like a job for someone who actually has the muscles for it." Relief washed over Hannah, so suddenly she almost laughed. She followed him to the storage room, thanking him more times than necessary. Logan waved it off, saying it was nothing, that he was glad to help. When he set the bag down, he looked at her properly for the first time, as if just now noticing her. "You look exhausted," he said. "Rough day." Hannah hesitated, then shrugged. Rough days were her normal. Logan didn't push, but something about his attentive expression made her feel safe enough to answer honestly. They talked, just a little at first, about work, about how tiring the market was, about how hard it was to get ahead. Logan asked questions. He listened. They began seeing each other after that. Logan started stopping by the market near closing time, offering to help Hannah pack up. Sometimes they walked through the city afterward, talking until the streets grew quiet. Other nights, they grabbed cheap takeout or sat on a park bench sharing stories. Logan was charming in an effortless way, warm and reassuring. He told Hannah she was strong, that she had been through too much alone. No one had ever said those things to her before. Logan worked an office job related to finance, though the way he described it made it sound far less impressive. He complained about his low salary, about boring tasks that didn't match his education, about a manager who underestimated him. Most of all, he talked about his mother. Margaret, he said, was controlling, critical, incapable of seeing that her son had grown into an adult. Living with her felt suffocating. Hannah understood that kind of suffocation when Logan learned about her past, about growing up unwanted and unsupported. Something in his expression changed. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her chest tighten. You deserved better, he said. I want to be there for you. Those words stayed with her. It happened gradually. Logan spent the night more often. A toothbrush appeared in her bathroom. A change of clothes stayed in her closet. Eventually, he stopped going back to his mother's apartment at all. Hannah suggested, almost shyly, that he move in. Logan agreed easily. Relief evident on his face. Living together felt like proof that she mattered. For the first time, Hannah woke up beside someone who chose her. She cooked breakfasts. She listened to Logan talk about his frustrations. She reassured him when he doubted himself. The apartment felt warmer with another presence inside it. Fuller. Not everyone shared her optimism. Lena, her employer at the market, raised an eyebrow when Hannah mentioned Logan. She asked blunt questions. Who paid the rent? Who bought the groceries? What exactly Logan contributed? When Hannah defended him, Lena only sighed and said she had seen this story before. Other acquaintances hinted at the same thing, that Logan was too comfortable, that he had moved from his mother's support to Hannah's without much effort. Hannah refused to hear it. Love, she told herself, was not a transaction. Logan worked. He had plans. He talked about gaining experience, about finding a better position once the timing was right. More than that, he made her feel seen. He made her feel chosen. After a lifetime of being invisible, Hannah clung to that feeling with both hands. The proposal came after one of Logan's worst arguments with his mother. He arrived home late that night, tense and restless, pacing the small apartment as he spoke. Margaret Price, according to him, had crossed another line. She had criticized his job again, questioned his independence, implied that he was still a boy pretending to be a man. Logan's voice shook with frustration as he repeated her words, each sentence sharpening his resentment. She doesn't believe in me, he said. She never has. Hannah listened quietly, offering comfort the way she always did. She understood what it felt like to be dismissed, to have your worth measured by someone else's expectations. When Logan stopped pacing and looked at her, something resolute settled into his expression. Let's get married, he said suddenly. Hannah froze, unsure she had heard correctly. Her heart skipped, then tightened. Logan repeated himself, slower this time, as if the idea had been waiting for the right moment to surface. Marriage, he explained, would prove he was serious, independent, capable of building a family on his own terms. More than that, he said he loved her. He wanted a real life with her. Hannah's first instinct was disbelief, followed quickly by hope. No one had ever chosen her so decisively before. She said yes without asking herself the questions she should have asked. Meeting Margaret soon followed. Margaret Price invited them to dinner at her apartment. She was older than Hannah expected, her posture rigid, her movements precise. Years in management had shaped her demeanor. She was polite from the moment Hannah stepped inside, but the warmth stopped there. Every question felt like an assessment: where Hannah studied, what her plans were, how much Logan earned. The answers seemed to confirm whatever concerns Margaret already held. At one point, Margaret looked directly at her son and said, calmly but firmly, that marriage was premature. Logan did not earn enough to support a family. He was not ready. Hannah sat silently, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, unsure whether to speak or disappear. The message was clear. Margaret did not approve. Logan argued. He defended his decision passionately, insisting he was an adult capable of making his own choices. Margaret eventually changed the subject, but the tension lingered. Hannah left that evening with a familiar ache in her chest. Once again, she was not the right kind of woman. Not enough. The wedding itself reflected that reality. There was no celebration, no gathering of families. Hannah's father and Diane declined to help, citing expenses and obligations to the younger children. Margaret claimed her savings were tied up in medical treatment. In the end, Hannah and Logan registered their marriage quietly and went to a modest restaurant afterward. Just the two of them. Hannah wore a simple dress. Logan held her hand across the table and promised her that this was only the beginning. Married life, however, brought no dramatic change. Logan continued working the same job, earning the same modest paycheck. He talked about better opportunities, about how experience would eventually open doors, but little effort followed. He still met friends regularly, still spent evenings out while Hannah managed the household. Financial responsibility remained largely hers. Rent, groceries, utilities, Hannah covered what Logan could not. And yet, she wore her wedding ring proudly. She believed in what it symbolized. Love, commitment, the idea that someone had chosen her not because she was useful, but because she mattered. When doubts surfaced, Hannah pushed them aside. Relationships required patience. Growth took time. She reminded herself that hardship was temporary, that love, once secured, could carry them through anything. After all she had endured, Hannah wanted desperately to believe that this time it would be different. Logan began talking about having a child not long after the wedding, as if it were the natural next step in proving that everything in their lives was moving forward. He spoke about it confidently, almost enthusiastically. A baby, he said, would change everything. It would give him focus, purpose, motivation. He talked about fatherhood the way some people talked about career breakthroughs, as a catalyst that would finally unlock his potential. Hannah listened, conflicted. She wanted a child. The desire had been there quietly for years, shaped by her own childhood and the ache of never having felt truly wanted. But she was also afraid. Their finances were unstable. Their apartment was small. Logan's income barely covered his share of expenses as it was. Hannah tried to voice these concerns carefully, not wanting to sound unsupportive. She mentioned rent, bills, the uncertainty of it all. Logan waved those worries aside. He promised things would improve. He spoke with conviction about finding a better job, about stepping up, about how responsibility would push him to succeed. Children are a powerful motivator, he repeated, echoing words Hannah had heard before, long ago, from another man who never followed through. Still, she agreed. The pregnancy came quickly. At first, Hannah was surprised by how unreal it felt. Then came the fear and the hope. For a brief moment, Logan seemed more attentive. He walked slower beside her, reminded her to rest, brought home fruit and small treats. Hannah allowed herself to believe that maybe this time the promises would hold. But the pregnancy was not easy. Hannah began experiencing complications early on. Dizziness, pain, exhaustion that went beyond normal fatigue. Her doctor grew concerned and warned her that continuing physical labor could lead to premature birth. Standing all day at the market, lifting heavy boxes, working outdoors in unpredictable weather, it was no longer safe. Reluctantly, Hannah quit her job months before she had planned to. The financial strain tightened immediately. The small savings she had managed to set aside dwindled faster than she expected. Logan continued working, but his salary remained the same. He complained often about increased workloads, about training requirements, about being overworked and underpaid. He spoke about job searches in theory, but interviews never materialized. Applications were never sent. Each rejection, when it came, seemed to drain what little energy he had left. At the same time, his nights out became more frequent. Logan said he needed time with friends to decompress, that the apartment felt suffocating, that everything revolved around the pregnancy now. Hannah did not argue. She stayed home, alone with her thoughts, feeling her body change in ways she did not recognize. She avoided mirrors. Her face broke out. Her ankles swelled. She felt heavy, awkward, unlovable. Logan made jokes about it. Not cruel ones, not exactly, but careless. Comments about her mood, about how sensitive she had become, about how he missed the old Hannah. Each remark landed harder than he seemed to realize. By the time their daughter was born, Hannah was already exhausted. Nora arrived a little earlier than expected. Small, fragile, but healthy enough not to require intensive care. The moment Hannah held her, the fear and resentment fell away. Love flooded in, fierce and overwhelming. This tiny person needed her completely. Nothing else mattered. Logan organized a cheerful hospital discharge. Balloons, flowers, music playing softly as they left. He smiled for photos, cradled Nora carefully, told everyone how proud he was. Margaret came by with gifts, visibly moved by the sight of her granddaughter. For a brief moment, it felt like the beginning of something new. That feeling did not last. The first nights at home shattered Logan's expectations of fatherhood. Nora cried often. She slept in short intervals. Hannah barely rested at all. Logan tried to help at first, but frustration quickly replaced enthusiasm. He complained about being tired, about needing sleep for work. When the crying continued, he retreated to the living room, closing the door, sometimes wearing earplugs so he wouldn't hear it. "I have to get up early," he reminded Hannah sharply. "I'm the one earning money." Hannah did not argue. She felt guilty for disturbing him, guilty for not being able to soothe Nora faster, guilty for everything. Days blurred together in a cycle of feedings, doctor visits, laundry, and worry. Nora needed medication, special care, constant attention. Hannah barely found time to eat, let alone clean properly. Logan grew impatient. He criticized the disorder, the lack of home-cooked meals, the chaos. He asked why other women managed better, why their apartments were clean, their dinners ready, their babies calmer. Hannah tried harder. She pushed herself beyond exhaustion, and it was never enough. Soon, Logan began staying out overnight. At first, it was once in a while. Then entire weekends passed without him. When Hannah called, she heard unfamiliar voices in the background. Laughter, music. He brushed off her concerns, saying she was imagining things, that he needed space. That fatherhood was harder than he had expected. Hannah rocked her crying daughter in the dark and felt the truth settling in, heavy and undeniable. The promises had collapsed, and she was alone again. Logan did not leave quietly. He came home one afternoon when Nora was just over a year old. Smelling of expensive cologne Hannah did not recognize, his mood strangely calm. He sat at the small kitchen table as if preparing for a routine conversation, not a confession that would dismantle what little stability remained. Hannah knew something was wrong before he spoke. She always did. That familiar tightness settled in her chest, the one she had felt as a child when adults talked around her instead of to her. "I'm in love," Logan said without hesitation. The words hung in the air, sharp and unreal. Hannah stared at him, waiting for clarification, for context, for remorse. None came. He explained it as if describing a change in plans. Her name was Vanessa Hart. She was older, successful, independent. She had no children, no complications, no constant needs. With her, Logan said, he felt light again, free, like himself. Hannah asked the questions that mattered. What about Nora? What about rent? What about everything they had promised each other? Logan waved a hand, irritated. He said couples weren't property, that staying together for the child was outdated thinking. He insisted he would help financially, though he could not explain how. His own income had never been reliable. Vanessa, however, lived well. She traveled. She drove a car that cost more than Hannah's annual earnings. Logan spoke about her lifestyle with something close to awe. That night he packed his things. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting. Hannah barely spoke. She stood in the doorway holding Nora, watching Logan leave with a duffel bag and a sense of relief that was almost insulting. He did not look back. He did not ask when he could see his daughter. He simply said he would call. He did not. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Hannah's life. Nora was often sick, prone to infections that required medication Hannah could barely afford. The rent deadline loomed like a threat. The savings were gone. Hannah calculated expenses obsessively, subtracting one necessity to pay for another. She skipped meals. She diluted formula. She told herself it was temporary, that something would appear because it had to. But nothing did. Logan's social media told a different story. Photos of beaches, rooftop bars, hotel rooms with white curtains billowing in the wind. Vanessa appeared occasionally in reflections and cropped frames. Elegant, relaxed, untouched by worry. Logan looked exactly the way Hannah had feared he would. Thriving. Hannah did not cry much. There was no time. Fear kept her upright, moving, functional. But at night, when Nora finally slept, Hannah sat in the dark and felt the old, familiar truth pressed down on her. She had been left again. The knock on the door came one morning when Hannah least expected it. She thought it might be the landlord, or a utility company, or worse. She opened the door slowly, bracing herself. Margaret Price stood in the hallway. She looked smaller than Hannah remembered, paler. Her posture was stiff, as if holding herself together required effort. She did not smile. She did not apologize. She simply stepped inside when Hannah moved aside. "I assumed this would happen," Margaret said quietly, glancing at the sparse apartment, the toys on the floor, the tired child clinging to Hannah's leg. "Logan has always been like this." Hannah said nothing. Margaret sat at the table, folded her hands, and spoke with a bluntness that felt almost kind. She admitted she had never believed Logan was ready for marriage or fatherhood. She had tried to warn him, she said, tried to delay things. But men like him, she explained, often needed to prove independence without possessing it. Then Margaret said something Hannah did not expect. "I know what it's like to be unwanted," she said. "I was too." She spoke briefly of her own childhood, of being tolerated but never chosen, of learning early that survival mattered more than affection. She did not dwell on it. She did not seek sympathy. She simply stated it as fact. "I won't pretend to be warm," Margaret continued. "That's not who I am. But I won't abandon a child. And I won't let you end up on the street." She offered them a room. Temporary. Practical. No emotional promises attached. Hannah felt something loosen inside her chest. Not relief exactly. Something steadier. Safer. That night, Hannah packed what little they owned once again. When she closed the door to the apartment for the last time, she did not look back. She held Nora close and stepped into a future that was not loving, but it was solid. And for the first time in months, that was enough. Life in Margaret's apartment settled into a quiet, disciplined rhythm. There was no excess warmth, no gentle reassurance, but there was structure. Bills were paid on time. The refrigerator was always stocked with the basics. Margaret rose early, moved deliberately, and expected the same order from the household. Hannah and Nora were given the largest bedroom, bright in the mornings, with a window that overlooked a small park. It was more consideration than Hannah had received in years. Hannah spent her days caring for Nora and searching for work. She scrolled through job listings during naps, making careful calculations. Returning to teaching was impossible for now. Daycare costs alone would swallow any modest salary. Market work was no longer an option either. Not with a toddler in tow and no one to help. Rejection became routine. Families wanted nannies without children. Employers wanted flexibility Hannah could not offer. Some never called back once they heard she had a daughter. Each polite refusal chipped away at her resolve, though she tried not to show it. She could not afford despair. Nora depended on her. The suggestion came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while Hannah pushed Nora's stroller through the park, a woman from the neighboring building struck up a conversation. She had seen Hannah often, noticed how attentive she was, how calmly she spoke to her child even when tired. The woman mentioned that her son and daughter-in-law had struggled to find childcare for their granddaughter when she was younger. Good caregivers, she said, were rare. "You ever thought about nanny work?" she asked casually. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. She explained her background in education, her training, her experience with children. The woman listened carefully and advised her to emphasize that in any applications. Pedagogical training mattered, she said. Families noticed. That evening, Hannah wrote a simple listing. Honest. Direct. She mentioned her teaching background. She mentioned Nora. She did not hide anything. The calls began quickly and ended just as quickly. Some families liked her experience, but balked at her daughter. Others seemed enthusiastic until schedules were discussed. Hannah thanked them all politely, hanging up with a practiced steadiness that masked her disappointment. She began to wonder if this, too, was a dead end. Then, one afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The woman on the line introduced herself as Mrs. Bennett. Her voice was calm, measured, slightly guarded. She explained that they were looking for a nanny for her grandson, Miles. He was 4 years old, quiet, withdrawn. He had stopped speaking almost entirely after his mother passed away. Doctors had been consulted, specialists too. There was no formal diagnosis, just grief that had settled deep and refused to loosen its grip. "We've had several nannies," Mrs. Bennett said carefully. "None worked out." Hannah listened without interrupting. Something in the woman's tone felt different, less transactional, more tired. When Hannah mentioned Nora, there was a pause. Then Mrs. Bennett said it would not be a problem. If anything, she added, it might help. They agreed to meet. The Bennett home felt like another world. Manicured lawn, clean stone walkway, quiet. Inside, everything was orderly but subdued, as if sound itself had been muted. Miles sat on a sofa clutching a small wooden car, his eyes distant, his posture tense. Hannah did not approach him immediately. She set Nora down gently, letting her explore within reach. Nora, curious and fearless, toddled forward on unsteady legs. Miles watched her closely. When Nora reached out and touched the wooden car, Hannah held her breath. Miles did not pull away. Instead, he placed the car in Nora's hands. Nora laughed, a clear, bubbling sound that filled the room. Miles stared at her, startled. Then, slowly, something changed in his expression. He smiled, just briefly, but it was unmistakable. Mrs. Bennett pressed a hand to her mouth. Over the next hour, Hannah watched something unfold that no interview questions could have predicted. Miles stayed close to Nora, protective, attentive. He followed Hannah's calm instructions without resistance. When Nora stumbled, Miles reached out to steady her. By the end of the visit, the decision was made. Hannah became Miles's nanny. The days that followed were transformative. Miles did not speak at first, but he listened. He responded to Hannah's patience, her quiet encouragement, her refusal to rush him. He read picture books with Nora beside him. He played games. He began to trust. And in caring for Miles, Hannah felt something she had not felt before. She was not invisible here. For the first time, her presence did not merely fill a gap. It healed one. And as Miles slowly reopened to the world, Hannah realized that in the process she was doing the same. Hannah met Miles's father on an ordinary morning. Ethan Bennett had returned early from a business trip, expecting to pass quietly through the house before heading back out. Instead, he paused in the hallway, listening. From the living room came soft laughter, the sound of blocks being stacked and knocked down, Nora's delighted squeal, and Miles's voice, still careful, still tentative, but undeniably present. Ethan stood frozen. When Hannah noticed him, she rose immediately, apologizing for the noise, explaining the routine, the schedule, the small milestones they had been celebrating. Ethan listened, but his attention kept drifting back to his son, who was now kneeling on the floor beside Nora, showing her how to build a tower without it collapsing. "He didn't used to do that," Ethan said quietly. Hannah nodded. She did not take credit. She simply explained how children grieve differently, how patience mattered more than pressure, how safety often came before speech. Ethan thanked her, not with formality, but with something closer to relief. From that day forward, their conversations became part of the routine. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Ethan asked about Miles's progress. Hannah answered honestly, carefully. Sometimes they spoke about logistics, sometimes about parenting, sometimes about nothing at all. He noticed how Hannah never spoke over Miles, never dismissed Nora's needs to prioritize another child. He noticed her steadiness, her lack of performance. She noticed his consistency, his quiet attentiveness, the way he never disappeared emotionally even when work demanded his time. Affection, when it arrived, did so gently. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Just trust built through repetition, through showing up, through choosing the same people every day. Margaret watched it all with a reserved kind of satisfaction. Her health, fragile for years, improved once Ethan helped arrange specialized treatment she had long postponed for financial reasons. Margaret accepted the help without pride or shame. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes required humility. With stability returned to her body, she softened, not dramatically, but enough. She laughed more with Nora. She listened more carefully to Hannah. She no longer held herself apart as a judge, only as a witness. The household changed. It was not loud. It was not perfect. But it was real. Years passed. Miles grew into a thoughtful, expressive boy. Nora followed him everywhere, fearless and adored. Hannah returned to education, gradually, balancing work she loved with a family that respected her limits. Ethan remained steady, not as a rescuer, but as a partner. He chose them not once, but continually, in small, unremarkable ways that mattered most. Logan reappeared unexpectedly. His message was casual, almost nostalgic. He suggested coffee, said he wanted to catch up. Hannah understood the impulse immediately. Logan had always needed to see himself reflected in other people's eyes. He expected, she suspected, to find her diminished. She agreed to meet him. The cafe was one they used to frequent years earlier, back when promises had still sounded like plans. Logan arrived first, scanning the room with the same practiced confidence. When Hannah walked in, he straightened instinctively, already smiling. Then he faltered. She was calm, well-dressed, unhurried. There was no tension in her posture, no apology in her expression. She greeted him politely, warmly, but without invitation. Their conversation lasted less than an hour. Logan spoke mostly about himself, his travels, his projects, his restless search for fulfillment. He asked about Nora vaguely. Hannah answered factually. When he hinted at regret, she did not challenge him. When he implied that things might have been different, she did not argue. She did not need to. The contrast was answer enough. When they parted, Logan looked smaller than he remembered. Not ruined, just irrelevant. Hannah left the cafe without triumph, without bitterness. Only clarity. At home. The children were waiting. Miles wanted to show her a story he had written. Nora demanded attention with theatrical urgency. Ethan had taken the afternoon off. Pancakes already cooling on the table. Margaret sat by the window, content, present. This was not revenge. It was something quieter. The story Hannah lived did not end with someone else's downfall. It ended with her standing in a life that no longer required permission. A family built not on obligation, but on choice. Not on blood alone, but on presence. Quiet resilience had carried her here. Patience had done what anger never could. And sometimes, that is the most complete victory of all. For everyone listening, the question remains, what does real family mean to you? Where have you seen silent strength change a life? And do you believe the quiet paths are sometimes the ones that lead us home?